Young lad, righteous. War can't buy great. Then craftsman so full of technique. Make him feel like someone good and then alright. Show up at them night, cause we hard clean. Enough of them say them a do it, but them not do it like we. On them know for what them hear about. Warrior they are to what them hear about. Up it, they can make it hear out. Anybody not the way them a feel clear out. Like switched up.
Hey everyone, now, I present, What If Sakura Was in My Hero Academia, Part 1. Now please enjoy. All she wanted was to be of help. To be strong enough to stand side by side with those who protected her and to return the favor. That was the only real desire for Sakura. And for a moment she thought she had succeeded. This was meant to be a great ending, where three friends united, fighting together in a war against a godlike being, saving the world, and more importantly each other. It was only supposed to take one touch to end this battle. And Sakura was willing to take the plunge as she had been paid little attention to and therefore was in the best position to strike and stall the opponent for a split second. That all they needed and she wanted to give it to them. As usual, however, she didn't consider the price of her actions. The fourth Shinobi War. Her first war, and what she hoped would be her last. All ninja band together, putting aside their histories to defeat a greater enemy. And after all the bloodshed and loss it looked like things were finally coming to an end. The final obstacle as it were, she, Naruto, Sasuke, and Kakashi, her team, her friends, her family. They were finally about to put an end to this war together. Her strength was supposed to be near unrivaled, but of course, against something that was defined as a god, what did she expect? Still, it was satisfying when she brought her fist down on the horn of the white-haired woman Kaguya. Hearing it crack. Now Naruto. The raven-haired Uchiha called from her right, barely acknowledging her appearance, focused only on the task of sealing away the being between all of them. Naruto on her left striking the same extended pose as Sasuke as they drew near and finally their palms landing simultaneously on her shoulders. Finally, Sakura couldn't believe it was over. Or so she thought until a long line of silver filled her vision and a burning hot filling a chest, lined with a painful cold and her mouth filled with a taste of iron. She looked down at the heap of hair that had impaled her, so focused that she had missed the black behind her and had no choice but to fall back, barely hearing her name being called with alarm. Likely for the last time. There was lava in her sight, enclosed in darkness and rock, the heat hitting her without physical contact, and then there was snow, an atmosphere of white and wind, instantly cooling her to the point where she wished for the heat again. There were mountains, a world of acid that threatened to splash all over her, and then a desert where she could taste sand even from the air. It was all in passing, surrounded with black as if they were pictures in frames. It was almost like one running, catching nothing but blurs, only this time she could feel the environment of those images and then nothing but darkness. Yet she continued to feel herself falling, her limbs incapable of movement against the force generated, her neck craned forcefully and painfully back. There was no time for her to breathe and what was left of her lungs were starting to burn after several minutes without oxygen. Am I going to die? She wasn't scared, as much as she was disappointed. It was like she had just been able to peer at the finish line before she tripped, blundered, and lost sight of it again. There were probably many others who had felt the same way. Maybe she would find some sympathizers on the other side. Maybe some of her comrades were waiting for her. Or maybe she was going to wake up all alone. Either way, she knew that she wouldn't be able to see Naruto or Sasuke. At least they would have a chance to keep living. With that in mind, she became content. Due to her ordeal, she failed at first to see the stars in the night sky that appeared suddenly. She didn't feel the cold air or the wind whipping across her face, hitting her with her hair, and thankfully she also didn't feel the hard ground that she crashed heavily into, imprinting herself in the earth. It took a few minutes before the pain finally settled over her body, but she was relieved that the sensation of falling had finally stopped and there was no longer a shifting change in the air. Everything was still. She didn't know how much time passed as she slipped in and out of consciousness constantly. Her body refused to move, but it felt like something was crawling around in her chest enough to make her shiver, then the heat in her chest dimming to a calming warmth that was beginning to become comforting. She couldn't see the hole in her chest shifting, the skin and muscle forming under the bright glow of Sakura, the hairs snaking around her, stopping the bleeding. While she could barely take in a breath, she still held on, as if she was in the early stages of drowning, where you were in complete agony, wanting to breathe but refusing to open your mouth to inhale water, the inside of your head expanding like it was ready to burst. All she could hold on to was the warmth in her chest, as the rest of her body went cold. But then she heard the ear-piercing sirens ringing through her. Shortly after, there were red and blue flashes of light and she could have sworn she heard voices and footsteps, but her senses were dulled due to her injuries. Over here. Call an ambassador. Dawn, asleep. Hold on. She tried to keep her eyes open, but when the world started moving again, and blurred silhouettes started appearing, and she felt herself moving without a will, she didn't want to stay awake anymore and finally gave into the short relief of unconsciousness. When Sakura began to come out of the darkness, all she felt was pain. Her head throbbed so hard she could hear it, like someone was taking a hammer and beating her skull from the inside. Her vision blurred and was dominantly white. As she moved her fingers, feeling something on one of them, pinching down. She looked down and saw a pulse oximetry and then felt the oxygen mask around her face. Overlooking her body, she found herself wearing nothing but a thin papery gown. She then allowed her eyes to wander further. The aesthetics of the room and a strong smell of disinfectant proved she was in a hospital, but she didn't know exactly where this hospital was located. There was a window but the blinds hid the outside. It appeared to be early afternoon judging from the light visible through the cracks. Where are my clothes? There wasn't any closet, aside from the small dresser at the bed, but that was empty. Sakura glanced over at the equipment she was strapped on, which almost looked like life support, with an oxygen machine, heart monitor, and four. It was a bit different from the equipment she worked with, but it seemed to have more or less the same functions. She just wanted to unstrap herself from all of it. She pulled out the drips from her arms and then went to the oximetry, while the machine went off to alert the detachment. Seconds only passed before the door flew open and the doctor stepped in with haste. "Ah, you're awake. How are you feeling?" She didn't respond, watching cautiously as a middle-aged man in a doctor's coat walked around the room, at the end of the bed to get a chart clipped on. Likely in the late 30s or early 40s, with dark hair slowly beginning to gray, a light stubble with a lean build. "I'm Dr. Harada." Again, Sakura didn't respond. If she was expected to be taken to a hospital, she would have thought it'd be the one in her village where everyone would know her, but since she wasn't, she felt unusually cautious. "Ah, good, she's awake." Another individual had entered the room, but Sakura didn't see them at first over Dr. Harada's shoulder. That was because of this person's height. There was an elderly woman, gray hair styled into a netted bun, a large syringe poking diagonally out of it to the left, with close-drawn eyes. In a doctor's lab coat and a dress, and had a helmet around the sides of her head, a purple-tinted visor joining it over her eyes, which were narrowing in on Sakura. "But you shouldn't remove those drips, dear, you still need them and monitoring." Harada nodded. "That's right, we've been overseeing your progress these last 5 days and I think that is too soon for such." "5 days?" Sakura blurted. "So you can speak." The doctor gave a small smile, but he approached with caution, but it was likely more on her behalf. "Yes, you've been unconscious for the last 5 days." Sakura began investigating her injuries, but she couldn't find any at all. What happened to me?" The doctor and unnamed woman stared at Sakura a moment longer than necessary before he walked over to the side of her bed. "That's what we were hoping you would tell us, but perhaps after a re-examination just to access your condition. Recovery girl, would you mind?" The woman shook her head. "Of course not." Sakura tilted her head, unable to shake off the strange name. "Recovery girl, that's your name?" "That's right, dear." But then she noted the baffled expression on the pinkette's face and came to understand what she was insinuating. "Oh, my real name is Chio Shuzenji, Recovery Girl is my hero name." "Huh?" Sakura couldn't stop herself, but it seemed that she wouldn't receive further explanation at this point. "Chio-sen?" Well, if it's more comforting to use my first name, that's fine. Are you hungry? Not really, she hadn't eaten in 5 days, but she wasn't. Well, still, you should eat. I'll get a nurse to bring you something, but first I need to do a quick examination and ask some questions. The examination didn't concern Sakura, as knew how it was performed and what was expected. But when she had to disrobe, she almost fell over and rushed to the mirror at the sink in the corner of the room. Around the center of her chest, contrasting against even her skin, was a near sickly pale white patch latching onto her skin, twisting and formed grotesquely. A similar image but a smaller contraction was also near the small of her back. And she remembered the wound that was now healed, the wound that should have ended her life in that instant. Impossible. She didn't understand where she was still, and there was a nagging knot slowly beginning to tangle in the pit of her stomach as more time passed, but she didn't know if it was placed. Chio was speechless when she saw it as well. My word, that scar, who would do such a thing? The pinkette didn't say anything, only lightly brushing her fingers over the mark to ensure that it was real, its texture softer than it appeared. What the hell? Though a scar on her chest was the least of her worries, it still lingered. As promised, after the examination, recovery girl had a meal brought up for her, and the scent brought her hunger to surface. It was just a chicken sandwich and a bottle of juice, since too much food in her state could make her sick, but she didn't complain when there was also a small chocolate bar set on the side of the tray. How did I end up here? Sakura wiped her mouth, feeling a smudge of mayo on the side. Recovery girl had been sitting on the side of her bed patiently waiting for her to finish without disrupting her meal, but she had questions for her. You were found near a lake by the bridge. It's only a few kilometers away from the hospital, and a good thing too. Eraserhead found you and immediately called for an ambulance. Sakura squinted her eyes. Eraserhead? Chio paused. He's the hero who found you. I suppose you wouldn't know him since he prefers working discreetly. It was just the name that baffled her, but now Sakura was questioning a few other things. What was she referring to? He'll probably be coming in with the investigator tomorrow. Who? Sakura leaned in. Something didn't sound right about this. Investigator in her experience meant interrogator, an interrogation which didn't bode well for a ninja. Oh, don't worry, he just wants to ask you some questions about what happened to you, and probably your information so that we can contact a family member to come here and get you. Sakura made a small noise to acknowledge she heard what she said, but she couldn't quite understand and decided to push back all the other questions. She had to ask a simple one. Where exactly is here? Musutafu City. There was a visible show of fright that didn't go unnoticed. Where is that? Sakura asked. The knot in her stomach grew a little bigger with anxiety. Japan, near Tokyo, Chio said slower, watching the girl carefully for her reaction. Sakura just sat there silently, covering her mouth with her hand. Her head throbbing as she thought hard about what happened that might have led her to this situation. She remembers the war, and she remembers fighting with Naruto, Sasuke, and Kakashi against Kaguya, and then she was stabbed. She was falling and shooting from the bed. Sakura rushed over to the window to open the blinds, wincing at the intensity of light the setting sun would give before surrendering to the night. Sakura saw the outside of the hospital, but further ahead there were many buildings with an unfamiliar design towering most of the area. With the few pieces she had right now, Sakura was beginning to get a clear picture of her situation as she recalled what happened again. And much more detail. Oh, no. When Recovery Girl saw Sakura about ready to jump into a state of hysteria, she quickly withdrew and told her to rest for the night and to call if she needed anything, and that she would inform Dr. Harada as well. She thought it best to give her some time to calm down before questioning her further, and also decided that she may need to perform a CAT scan because she was no longer certain if her mental state hadn't suffered any trauma based on a few quick, yet accurate, medical analysis. Sakura had dinner and was then left alone for the rest of the night, with a nurse silently checking in on her every hour. But Sakura was too engrossed in thoughts. While it was a difficult situation to swallow, it was certainly possible from recent experience that she had been transported into another dimension by Kaguya's power. The only difference was there was actually life in this world, a society, but she still didn't know very much about it. Which was why she managed to gather herself enough not to ask about how to get back to her home. She came off as suspicious enough. It couldn't be that Kaguya had planned to escape to this world, right? It didn't look like it made for much of a battleground. But now Sakura was stuck here. She didn't want to say for certain that she was in another world, but every time she glanced out her window, it was seeming more plausible. And if she was in another world, there was just one dreadful thought that came to mind. How the hell am I going to get back home? Another issue was whether or not she should stay in the hospital and wait for that investigator, or if she should just try and figure things out on her own. She managed to stall for time with Dr. Harada and she a recovery girl whatever, but that wouldn't be for long. She was starting to doubt revealing her identity in detail. I need some air. Taking a robe, she wrapped herself up, put on the hospital slippers, and carefully stalked out of the room. Ensuring her steps were completely silent and remaining vigilant for the night shift faculty, she made her way to the bottom floor to get to the exit. The large glass sliding doors came into view. Sakura watched as the automatic doors opened when someone left and then turned to the reception desk. There was a woman in scrubs behind, holding a small metal device in her hands, her face glowing from the light emitted by it. Whatever she was looking at, she was distracted. Sakura smirked, picking up a pebble from one of the fake potted plants decorating the reception and waiting area, and returned to hiding behind the corner. Pinching the stone between the top of her thumb and under her index finger, she flicked it forward. The pebble shot across the receptionist's desk and crashed into the wall at the opposite end of the room. With the window of opportunity open, Sakura went through with ease, taking her time as she passed the woman who wasn't even aware of her presence. Silent as a ninja she stepped, the sliding doors opened and she was out before the women looked back when hearing the sound. Ah, that's nice. Sakura stretched her arms, enjoying the cool night air against her skin. She looked up at the sky. There were few stars to admire and the moon was nowhere to be seen, unlike in Konoha where the moon was so big and bright she could see it completely from her room's window. She could also view the buildings from a different angle. They were different from the buildings at her home in her world. These were made dominantly of glass and concrete instead of wood or clay and shaped like rectangles. She was trying to convince herself of the slight possibility that she was still in her world, but it was almost non-existent. There were too many oddities she spotted to believe this was the same place. Her world would be returning from war. It wouldn't be this bright. This can't be my world, Sakura told herself. She wanted to explore this place, get a better understanding of the kind of world she was in. However, with being confined to a hospital bed she couldn't really do that, and certainly not with the way she was dressed. She took several minutes to just sit by the benches outside and enjoy the night air till she grew tired, or at least until someone spotted and dragged her back inside. However, neither happened because first, Sakura heard a frantic noise she didn't recognize, then the vehicle that came swerving towards the hospital. It had the hospital symbol on it. The back doors of the van swung open and people were rushing out, taking a stretcher through with them. She heard the muffled and pained screams of the person on the stretcher and caught the distinct smell of burning flesh. There was a man covered in red and black charred, screaming, his face barely visible, and it was clear he had on fire and from her judgment a long while before it was put out. Sakura followed the ambulance back into the hospital with the man who was in complete hysterics, screams now bouncing off the walls. Of course, no one could blame him, after all nearly his entire body, which increased the chance of fatality. We need to start treatment here. One of the paramedics called. What happened? Asked the receptionist. Apartment fire downtown, everyone got out except this one. Let's move him to the ER. The receptionist, who had run on the outside of her desk, then spotted Sakura standing near the table and went over, grabbing her arm. She recognized the pink cat because she saw her brought in a few days ago. Miss, what are you doing out of here? Sakura rushed over to the stretcher, passing the ambulance. Stop, I can help. When the paramedics looked back and saw the young pink cat, they returned to pushing the burn victim through the hospital with Sakura tailing after them. Leave this to us, kid, one commented. Sakura picked up her pace, grabbing hold of the stretcher and bringing it to a sudden halt. She glared at the paramedics. Burns of this degree are fatal, and they're covering more than 90% of his body. There's no way he'll survive the night if you're considering regular treatment. Now get out of the way so you don't have a dead body on your hands. The harshness of Sakura's tone and the stony glare was enough to keep the two paramedics in check as Sakura stepped over them to get to the screaming victim who was now writhing in pain. The pinkette barely glanced over the man before she placed her hands over his chest without touching. Don't worry. Her hands began to glow green from her chakra, extending out. She watched as the flesh burned and charred began to return to its original state. Healing burn victims took a little longer because the cells couldn't regenerate properly depending on the degree of heat that was used, but that's what made healing with chakra so advantageous. The cries of the man became softer and softer until they were non-existent. The paramedics watched silently as Sakura healed the burnt wounds completely, his skin reappearing and replacing the red and black charred skin. A healing quirk, one of them commented but received no response. Sakura sighed in relief as she finished her treatment. The man's pain was elevated, which allowed him to fall unconscious. All right, you can go ahead now, Sakura waved, walking away with a slight smile on her face, partially at the paramedic's surprised states and the other due to her pride in knowing she was able to save another life. Sakura went back to her room, and though she couldn't sleep with the weight of her situation still pressing onto her, this incident she was able to resolve, allowed her to breathe easier. Because at least she knew that she still had her ability. It made her feel like she would be fine. That it was possible for her. It didn't take long for Dr. Harada to get word of one of his patients healing a burn victim last night after sneaking out of the hospital herself. When he went to Sakura to check up on her, the pinkette had already received breakfast and was looking to be in much better shape than she should have. Her external injuries completely healed and her internal damage appeared non-existent when he took a look at her again. I heard an interesting story, Harada said, as he finished up Sakura's physical exam. You treated a burn patient last night? Sakura nodded. His entire body had been burned. He likely wouldn't have survived if I didn't heal him. Yes, but a near-perfect recovery from burn marks that should have left him scarred for life, is remarkable. Where is the other doctor, recovery girl, Chio Shizenshai? She wanted more information to analyze her situation but had to figure out where to begin. She also wanted to keep from giving out any information that might put her at risk in any way, whatever it may be. Oh, she'll be here shortly with Eraserhead and the investigator. In the meantime, here's a form I need you to fill out. If you have any queries, feel free to ask, Harada said, setting the form in front of her with the clipboard to press on. It was just a standard medical form, but still, there were several questions Sakura couldn't, and didn't want to, answer. A quick and somewhat childish thought came to mind to prevent any repercussions. She then gave the form back to the doctor, who quickly looked over it. Sakura Haruno, it suits you, Dr. Harada said, but you've left a lot of your personal information blank. We won't be able to contact anyone to come and. I don't have anyone to go to, at least not here, because I don't know where here is, the pinkette stated firmly. I've been racking my brain trying to figure out what might have happened to me. Drive, Harada appeared skeptic, overlooking her charts again. I see. I'm sorry, but I really have no clue where I am, how I got here. No, that's okay, assured Harada, although Sakura could see that it wasn't. Then there was a knock at the door and a nurse voice calling through, It's me, I've brought Detective Tsukachi and Eraserhead. Good timing, come on in, Harada called, sidestepping to allow the women and two men to enter the hospital room. Hello there, I'm Detective Naomasato Tsukachi, the detective introduced. He was a tall man with short black hair wearing an overcoat and matching hat that fit the part of a detective. This is Eraserhead. Shout Aizawa, said Chio, she seems to get a little lost when we use our hero names. Sakura looked at the man next to the detective. He was in clothes so black she couldn't tell if the top and pants were separate. He had pale skin and messy dark hair with a 5 o'clock shadow. In short, he looked like he needed a nap. And this as I've recently discovered is Sakura Haruno. Sakura bowed her head slightly. Hello. How are you feeling, Miss Haruno? Asked Tsukachi. Indescribable, and I prefer to be called by my first name. Haruno made her feel old for some reason. It wasn't uncommon for people to address one another by their last names, but Sakura wasn't used to anyone calling her by her last name. Alright, Sakura. We would like to ask you some questions. See, Eraserhead found you laying. I thought you said his name was Shada Aizawa. Eraserhead is my hero name, Aizawa clarified, but it didn't look like it helped Sakura. The pinkette tilted her head to the side. Hero name? Yes, Tsukachi said, like the pro heroes you see on TV, he just prefers to work on the. This was mentioned before, but I'm completely lost as to what you're referring to. She didn't see the point in waiting until after they had babbled to tell them she didn't know what they were saying to her. Yes, I noticed this as well, stated Chio. You don't know what a hero is? No, I know what a hero is, but the context might be another matter. Aizawa then chimed in, we're referring to those who answer calls to crime, capture villains, community services and such. We're the ones authorized to use our quirks in public spaces. Speaking of which, from what we heard you used your quirk without permission. Granted, it may have been necessary in a dire situation, but still. And now Sakura had another set of questions. What's a quirk? Are you referring to my healing? That's right, Tsukachi stated, you shouldn't use it in public without permission. Why not? Would it have been better if I let that man die? No. Tsukachi waved his hands around quickly, that's not what we meant, it's just the law. What law? Chio, Aizawa, and Tsukachi looked at each other, then to Dr. Harada, who was quick to give his hypothesis. It may be that her memories have been affected. At first, the scans showed no signs of trauma, and as you can see, her speech shows she's mentally stable, quite intelligent. However, she said she doesn't know where she is. Says she's never heard of Japan before, but I wasn't aware she had no memory of quirks either, despite being able to use her own. That is odd, but she doesn't seem to be lying, Tsukachi said softly. The pinkette could hear them, but she wasn't showing any sign of offense. Merely observing them. Let's get her name in the system and see if we can reach out to a relative or guardian first. Tsukachi turned off his cell phone, which he had used to contact the station, and checking for the name Sakura Haruno, but there was no one falling in the description of the pinkette. It doesn't look like she's on the system. There's no one with the healing quirk named Haruno, and there's no Sakura Haruno listed. Aizawa looked back at the pinkette. Is your name Sakura Haruno, or did you make it up for some reason? No, it's my real name, Sakura stated calmly. From what she could gather, they must have tried to find her identity, and it would figure they came up empty. After all, she wasn't from this world. Then why aren't you in the system? Asked Recovery Girl. She just shrugged. Aizawa, Tsukachi, Recovery Girl, and Harada stepped out of the room to have a private discussion. What do you think? Tsukachi asked. I'm convinced she's telling the truth. As am I, said Recovery Girl. I don't think she is lying, but there is likely something missing. Yes, and that's what worries me. Though it is odd she isn't anywhere on the system, I'm going to do a check on missing kids and runaways to see if she fits any of the descriptions, and for now I'll call social services to come and place her somewhere. The social worker was a plump woman with a friendly smile, in a neat skirt and blazer, who greeted Sakura kindly, but even with her demeanor, the kunoichi was completely appalled when she was told she would be placed in foster care to be looked after under adult supervision, since she was still just a minor. Even being in a strange new world, she did not want to be kept under constant watch, and it certainly seemed like that was their intention if she went along with them. Here are some clothes for you, we'll be waiting outside and then I'll take you to your new home. Sakura kept her smile until the door slid closed. Dropping the hospital gown on the floor, she changed very quickly into the outfit. It was a comfortable and rather worn gray yoga pants and a white tank top over a matching jacket and black sneakers, but it was decent enough for her to be able to leave the hospital in. Through the window that was, even from the 5th floor, It was an easy jump for a ninja, into the parking lot and out of the gates before anyone could see her or realize she was missing. New home? As if. In her role as a ninja, she had traveled to many different countries and had been able to compare structures of cities and buildings, but none were as glamorous or rather gaudy as what she saw right now. Buildings of solid concrete or glass that towered dozens of meters in the sky with large screens and flashing images that she was starting to get a better idea of what heroes were. Because they were being advertised around nearly every corner. Skin tight, brightly colored costumes with bold flashy messages of promotion. People with different skin tones, some similar to being anthropomorphic, with features of animals such as tails, wings, scales, fur, and more. Sizes exceeding the height of average humans at times. Yet already she could sense the normality to it all. And there was only one thought going through her mind. What kind of world is this? The concept of quirks was something Sakura found the most interesting about this world, as well as the rules that went with them. Quirks refer to the abilities and mutations that appeared in history without origin and vary among 80% of the population. Quirks cannot be used publicly by any non-licensed hero. Quirks cannot be used to injure other persons under any circumstances without just cause and a hero license. It was those fundamental rules that laid the foundation of labeling criminals, or as they were termed here, villains. This profession of heroism was born from the chaos the appearance of quirks had created. When everyone believed that they could use their power to shape the world as they wanted it. It was such a basic concept though. You have the power, flaunt it over others to get what you want. Power mixed with the selfishness of human nature, and that's what happens. The restrictions of quirks were a means of controlling the chaos that came with power, but she knew firsthand that it wasn't possible to control something like this. When you have power, it's easy to get caught up in ambitions. It was a web that couldn't be broken, untangled, or navigated. At some point, you just can't go on any further, and that's where you stop. The term heroes was primarily more of a title earned through an education system rather than selfless acts of bravery. It involved profit and popularity, rankings, and statics. When risking your life, receiving rewards certainly seemed more practical to Sakura. As a ninja who has been sent on death-threatening missions, she wouldn't be too happy if her success wasn't rewarded. But being a ninja was more than just a job. If that were the case, more people would have had choices when it came to becoming one. But there was status, expectations, loyalties, the sake of survival, talent, ability, traditions, and so much more that factored in when it came to being a ninja. A hero's path was much more narrow in this world, and evidently cleaner on their part. Understanding the foundation of this society was the means to help Sakura adapt quicker so she wouldn't cause disruptions while attempting to find a way out of this world. But she hadn't anticipated how differently it operated to hers. And realized that a flawless transition wasn't possible. Naruto had been known to attract trouble. Sakura wasn't sure if it was his subconscious that drew him to it or if this was just fate playing its hand. But whatever happened, Sakura was usually dragged along with him, as his teammate and friend. That excuse was moot in this world, and Sakura was beginning to think that when trouble came her way it wasn't due to someone else's fortune but her misfortune. There was a low crime rate in Japan compared to other countries in this world. The reason is said to be the great symbol of peace, All Might, the #1 hero who resided here. Japan also had that quirk restriction law which was unique. That didn't mean that there weren't crimes committed by those who thought to use their abilities to aid in their selfish desires. Of course, she had no intention of becoming a hero, nor did she want anything to do with vigilantism. There was an overflow of heroes working to deal with these problems. If only they had shown up a bit earlier. 2 days on her own in this world, and Sakura had spent the majority of it in a library researching and the rest exploring the city. She realized that she needed to find a way to sustain herself so that she could afford lodging. Going a few days without eating wasn't much of an issue for her, but she was going to have to replenish eventually. What can I do for money though? Despite her trailing thoughts and the loud roads she walked along, Sakura didn't miss the disturbance in the air as she passed the silent buildings, catching the hostile presence lurking in the darkness of those spaces. Please, let me go. Cackles and soft cries, strained with fear, were clearer as she pressed her back against the cold concrete and brick. "Hand over your purse." "Damn it." She strolled into the alley, examining the situation. 4 figures in total, 1 victim, and 3 villains. They weren't well illuminated under the dimness of the alley, but Sakura could see them well enough to know that one of them had hands like blades, each finger like sharp talons, the other literally had the appearance of an ape, similar facial and body structure. The third had wild hair like a porcupine and a rough face and was hunched forward like he couldn't bear the weight of his hair. The 3 had blocked any escapes with the help of the buildings forming the alleyway. Blade Hands was the first to notice the new figure moving into the darkness. "Hey you there. Kumo, get that one," said the ape. Kumo, the porcupine humanoid, towered over her. "All right little girl, hand over everything you've got and we might spare you." She kept her gaze down, hands in pocket. "Leave." "Huh?" All attention turned to her now. "I said leave. Get away from that woman and leave right now." Laughter echoed against the brick and cement. "You want us to leave? Ah, trying to play hero little girl? You think you're in any position to make demands? Get her Kumo." The porcupine's clawed hand reached towards her. That's when it all happened instantly. Grabbing his torn shirt, Sakura flipped the culprit into the air with one swift motion of her arm and watched him land on the ground with a heavy grunt. Sakura turned back and looked at the trembling women. "Go now." She stood up with difficulty but did her best to hurry before the other villains tried to grab her or block her opening. She ran past Sakura, taking a right out of the alley, taking her phone out to call a hero. "Should have taken the chance to leave when I gave it to you," Sakura said, looking over her first victim in this world. Feeling the wind shift behind her, she leaned far back, avoiding the swing by the gorilla man. He went in for another, hands clasped together and raised above his head. He shouted as he swung, "You're dead kid." Again Sakura sidestepped and his fists smashed into the concrete. "Ugh idiots." Swinging her leg up, Sakura hit him straight in his chest. A trick of blood fell from his lips as he was lifted high into the air, shooting past the rooftops of the buildings and a little higher before he started falling again. Sakura stared up. "Would you die if I didn't catch you?" Catch me," he cried, tears from his eyes, saliva from his mouth with limbs flailing around. He couldn't close his eyes and waited to hit the ground, but came to a sudden yet painful stop. His stomach lurched as the wind was knocked out of him, as well as his consciousness. "Okay then," Sakura tossed him under her palm further into the alley. He flew past his last standing accomplice until he hit a wall. He won't be waking up for a while. The man with blade hands grounded his teeth loudly. This little. Kumo recovered himself from the ground, but Sakura had already heard him shuffling behind her. He stood up, his hair began to bristle and crack as they hardened. You're dead." The attack never had a chance to be activated as a single push, sent him flying across the road to the opposite building's alley that lined up. They barely heard his grunt before trash cans smashing together. There and now all that's left is. She had to duck as blades swiftly cut through the air and then jumped to the side as they came down. "You're impatient." The blade fingers spread wide before the villain moved into attack again. Figuring that the alleyway was too confiding, Sakura moved out into the street. The hoodie slid off her head against the wind and the momentum of her movements as she evaded the attacks, pivoting away from her opponent with little effort. The villain didn't take too kindly to her casually evading his attacks, left, right, up, down. It didn't matter which direction, she maneuvered herself perfectly to evade. "You bitch." That was his last words before he kissed the tar. His vision blurred at the sight of a sneaker kicking him. He flew to the other side of the street. She ran her fingers through her hair, a small smile graced her face. It almost felt wrong to have relieved tension through fighting. Though it was only a sliver of weight lifted. "You there." There was the briefest sound of compressed air before Sakura saw someone rushing down the road as quickly as a vehicle. It was a man, but he was wearing a full set of white armor, including a helmet that hides his face. But she already knew he was looking at her through the plate of glass covering his eyes. Uh-oh, turning around, Sakura quickly attempted to escape, leaping onto the building's roof and moving out of sight. "Hey, come back here." She just kept running, vanishing into the night. The hero was unable to chase. Who was that? This was just one of the many incidents that the Kunoichi would be having. This was the first time in 3 days that Sakura has been noticed since leaving the hospital. She took no stops until returning to a vacant building close to the outskirts. The paint had worn in color with layers scraped back, revealing the brickwork, windows with edges of broken glass or vacant of any, letting in the moonlight. Inside was filled with boxes, papers, equipment, that held no value without function. It was eerie from outside, enough to discourage people from wandering in. Something Sakura was counting on. She leaned against the wall with the sturdiest appearance and just closed her eyes. Damn, what did I run for? It's not like she was the one who committed any crimes, but it seemed like the better option than being asked questions about a situation she hadn't meant to be involved in. Looking through the window at the full moon, reminded Sakura of what the moon in her world looked like before it bled red and reflected the Sharingan. That's all over now. Her hand reached inside her shirt to brush along the scarred skin on her chest. Concerning her objective to return home, Sakura had been able to conclude 2 options. Kaguya was able to open portals to different dimensions, including this one, and if the theory stood, then it was possible for someone with a similar ability to do the same. Sakura had witnessed it when Obito Uchiha had opened the different dimensions in search of Sasuke, though it took a massive amount of chakra from him and her. Unfortunately, even in her world, she could only count on one hand the individuals who could accomplish that feat, and considering that it's already been a few days, she wasn't feeling too confident in hoping for a rescue. There was an impact on her world, and Sakura didn't know what kind of turmoil may have resulted in the aftermath. Also, it was likely she would be assumed dead given her injuries when she was transported. Who would think she could survive a strike like that? It was easy to say that she would figure out her own way to get back home, but dimensional travel wasn't a familiar concept. And this world didn't have people with chakra, they had quirks. So her best option was to find a quirk that could open portals to dimensions. That was going to be like looking for a needle in the haystack, except there was no promise that the needle even exists. She was still going to search for it. I could use a more comfortable place to do it though, she sighed as a heavy breeze entered the building. Arriving in another world had its disadvantages, even more, when you were completely unprepared, having nothing but the clothes on your back. Sakura was trying to figure out a way to support herself while in this world, and further research, she learned that she wouldn't be able to do much in the light of the authority and labor laws. But there was always an underbelly to explore more lucrative options. And it didn't take long for her to find one. Alright folks, the time has finally arrived. Set all posturing aside, watch out for splatter in the first aisles as we get ready to unleash the competitors for tonight's show. Get ready to place your bets for the first match. Despite being an interloper, Sakura's ninja training had certainly helped pave her way through the underground world of Tokyo. Villains ran around the on-streets, sometimes in the middle of the day, committing all sorts of crimes, some to a ridiculous extent, but that didn't mean activity wouldn't go around in the dark. There was still some tact. It was all a matter of observation and knowing where to go for the right information, and through that Sakura discovered her way to making quick cash with little effort on her part. Many underground fight clubs were existing, all varying from application to types of audience. It was a place where quirks could run rampant and all gloves were off. Bloodlust seeped in the air, mingling with smoke that left a bad aftertaste in the mouth. Sakura just kept hers shut under a mask, much like Kakashi's, a bandana tied over her head hiding her pink locks and her hood also hanging over her face to shadow her identity. It wasn't being overly cautious, but the fashion many of the fighters were following. The company here wasn't exactly savory. The arena she stood in was more like a pit covered with a thick layer of metal running up to replicate the appearance of a cage. She entered from one end while her opponent entered from the opposite side, all in clear view of the audience. We've got some fresh blood out here tonight and we have your favorite competitor to spill it. Khan. There was a rouse, the ground shaking with a figure stomping, over 3 meters, shaggy faded orange fur lined with black and white that didn't hide the curves of muscles, fangs baring already and yellow eyes gleaming with hostility. A quirk that made him look like a tiger, albeit an enhanced version. A new little comer, and I do mean little. Nemesis. Real names were not usually exchanged in these fights, but the audiences needed something to bet on, and it was something that Sakura decided on after lightly browsing through a Greek mythology book. The crowds were calling out, but most were not in support. She had seen the line of brawlers, and there was a distinct menacing presence that each of them carried. It was barely a trickle to Sakura, but likely a shower to others. She didn't carry that in her presence constantly like a suit of armor. Khan snarled when she stepped into the spotlight. Thanks for the easy win, pipsqueak. The bets are placed, fighters get ready. Winner by knockout or surrender. No limits. Begin. Tigers were animals equipped with speed and power, and those qualities were also embedded in this man's quirk. It took 2 sprints to appear in front of Sakura, claws out to tear into her. She didn't move as they bared down, blurring. Debris tracked up, and from that cloud Khan exited with little grace, flying backward and hitting the iron cage hard enough to dent, his tongue out, eyes glazed white. I was thinking the same thing, dumbass. The crowd had a momentary lapse of silence, then grew with a roar of different voices meshing to become a cheer. Winner Nemesis. It was the first of many fights that would send the name Nemesis throughout the underground, becoming especially well known for winning by a single hit. As long as she continued to move with this persona, she could earn a living in the shadows and walk around in the light without care. Or so she thought. With her pockets now full, Sakura found a place to stay, a small 1-bedroom apartment in a run-down building with a landlord that didn't ask a lot of questions about his tenants. It was enough for someone who wasn't planning on making a life in this world. Still, this place is kind of interesting, to Sakura's distant thought. The only response she received was a small mew. Following the sound to a tabby cat anxiously staring at the open can of tuna, its bright green eyes crying out for its meal. Yeah, food first, vent after. You're getting fatter, you know? Not that it was bad given the previous condition of the cat. Sakura dished out the tuna into a food bowl, watching the cat gleefully begin to eat. Haven't seen you in a while. Her lips curved up, turning her head. Hitoshi. At the end of the underpass, a boy close to her age dressed neatly in school uniform, his indigo hair flaring from the breeze, purple eyes that were nearly constantly half closed. Hitoshi Shinso, the only person in this world Sakura allowed herself to become familiar with. The reason they met, currently enjoying a can of tuna and a bowl of milk. Ugh, what's up with this world's coddling nature? I can't believe another hero tried to chase me to a home I don't have. Apparently, it wasn't normal for teenagers to be walking around late at night in this particular area since there was an upspring in criminal activity in the neighborhood. That was the least of your concerns when you were in a foreign world with no provisions and little information. Also, she could protect herself well enough. She hadn't synced with this world just yet, and so much was different for her to instantly adapt. She was coming across an underpass that was looking like a good place to stay for the night, but someone was already there. 2 someones. A young boy, with droopy eyes who did not look like someone you'd see out this time of night. He was leaning against the wall, cradling a cat in his arms. Hey, are you okay? He glanced over with fright, surprised by her presence that had gotten close enough for his sense to pick up and yet hadn't. Who are you? Just passing by. Sakura leaned closer. What's wrong with this little guy? The boy looked sullen. He was laying on the side of the road. It looked like he was hurt, so I brought him to get checked out. Vex says he's probably not going to last the night. Sakura smiled, able to deduce the situation. So you're just keeping him company? Better than a noisy street. There was a bitterness behind his tone. I'm just waiting, then I'll find someplace to dig before heading off. Silently, her hands reached out, hovering above the furry animal, chakra concentrating into her hands to give a bright glow. She began healing the internal injuries, and quickly Sakura picked up an unusual rate of healing. Am I imaging this? She wondered. Before at the hospital, she had noted the slight speed in healing burns but hadn't thought about it too much since external injuries were not as difficult to fix in comparison to internal. What are you doing? the boy asked. I need to concentrate, he must have understood because he didn't say anything the rest of the time she healed. The cat opened its eyes, the previous dreariness was gone, eyes shining. It licked the tips of the pink cat's fingers affectionately. Meow. This little guy will be alright, now he just needs some tending. The boy stared in astonishment, before straightening his posture. I'm Hitoshi Shinso. Sakura Haruno. Then on, the two spent days meeting at the underpass to check in on the stray and in turn became familiar with each other. There was a lot of weariness at first, likely because neither were that willing to engage in personal conversation. Time removed the wall between them brick by brick. Sakura ended up catching Hitoshi more at the library where he would go to study as entrances exams would be coming up for junior high students. He showed Sakura how to use the computers there and access the internet, which just opened a whole new range of information for the girl she was grateful for. A few days is hardly a while, besides shouldn't you be off studying? Entrance exams for high schools are going to start sometime, aren't they? I have been studying. Hitoshi crouched down next to her to pet the cat. I doubt I can say the same for you, homeschooling must be nice. Hey, I've been busy. Just moved to a new place, Sakura grinned. When Hitoshi asked her what school she went to, she had come up with that lie and given her manners and all her free time. Hitoshi easily believed it. And by the way, I do go to the library to read. I still stand by my statement, said Hitoshi. I can hardly call your browsing studying. Are you planning on making it through your exams on minimum effort? Sakura stuck out her tongue, tasting the frosty air and sucked in a breath. It's pretty cold here, huh? It is that season, Hitoshi responded dryly. Do you already know what high schools you're applying for? Yeah, Hitoshi bit the bait. Mainly, I want to go to UA. When Sakura was still learning about heroes, she discovered that some of the best had one thing in common, and that was their attendance at the school with one of the top hero programs, but it was also considered to have difficult entrance requirements. I'm sure you'll get in, Sakura patted the boy's shoulder, but she easily noticed the way his demeanor deflated. Eyebrows furrowing, creating creases revealing doubt. What? Don't think you can do it? It doesn't matter what I think, UA isn't easy to get into. I'm applying to the hero course and the general studies. I don't get it, Sakura admitted. You want to be a hero, right? Hitoshi frowned. Why do you sound so surprised? Sakura shrugged. She didn't have the hype everyone else had about heroes. In the sociology papers she read on heroes, the basic principle was that they were the only ones permitted by the law to use their powers and hence were admired by society in turn for their actions. Anyone else who stemmed from the norms was considered deviants or villains. In that case, I would easily be considered one too. There were plenty of villains lurking around corners and back alleys, and with her keen senses Sakura could easily detect bloodlust and malicious intent, that carried her into those places at times to deal with these individuals who were using their powers outside of the law to commit crimes, and she would be considered a villain for exercising her power to remedy those actions. In the last few weeks that Sakura had been to this world, she dealt with purse-snatching incidents, attempted burglary, and attempted murder. Of course, those weren't the only crimes she had witnessed to, but like most of the public eye, she had remained in the spectator and civilian seat since there were heroes around to deal with the situations. Right, everyone wants to be a hero, don't they? Hitoshi looked at the cat purring against him. Of course they do, but not everyone gets to. I'm picking up that there's more to what you are saying, so just say it. At this point, Sakura knew that Hitoshi was not one to mask his words, and he was brazen. My quirk probably isn't what you'd consider hero-worthy. Quirks were such a norm that it was often the first thing you'd find out about a person after their name, yet Hitoshi hadn't told Sakura about his, and she didn't ask either. That was just one of the few things he found out about her. What is your quirk? Brainwashing. There was a heavy pause in which Hitoshi was waiting for the girl to fill with questions and statements he had heard many times in revealing his quirk, but none came. She was just sitting there, waiting for him to explain. I can make anyone who responds to me do whatever I tell them. Sakura rested her chin on her knees. So you can make people do whatever you want? And you're still completely conscious when that happens? What are you talking about? Of course, I am. You can guess why that wouldn't be considered a great quirk for a hero. Sakura shook her head. No, I really don't. I think it's an impressive ability. Mental powers are considered a lot harder to deal with than physical powers. It creates a wound you can't see, and if you can't see it you don't know how to fix it, which is why I think they're pretty incredible abilities. Complete surprise and perhaps apprehension showed in his face this time. I've gotten used to people hearing about my quirk and telling me not to brainwash them. Even associating it with villains. But what you said, that's a new one. Now Sakura realized why he was so taken aback by her words. This world did its best to be black and white. I had a friend with a similar ability. She could transfer her will into other people and control them. It allowed her to subdue stronger opponents easily with minimal damage, which isn't something you can say for some of the heroes around here. Property damage was something that this world prioritized over the capture of villains, and if a hero had breached this priority in a fight then they would be charged for damages. Another aspect Sakura found ridiculous, since it was always possible to replace and repair broken roads or damaged buildings. People's lives were another matter. For someone who had witnessed her entire village get destroyed instantly, Sakura didn't hold a high value on those kinds of rules. Still, people think it's a quirk better suited for villains' work. She snorted. So basically it's the quirk that makes the man? I don't think you'd get a lot of villains standing in the dead of night keeping an injured cat company. Not a lot of decent civilians would do that either. It's your actions that define you, not your power. I'm into the whole hero business, to be honest, but I do think that someone like you would make a good one. It must have been the first time he had ever heard anyone say something like that to him. Hitoshi turned his head away, but Sakura caught his smile. The small meow grabbed her attention. She set the cat on her thighs, stroking its head. We should find him an owner. We haven't even given him a name. Because that's something its owner should do, stated Hitoshi, keeping his head turned to the light at the entrance of the underpass. Licked. What? His name, Licked. I thought you couldn't take him? Sakura recalled this conversation. She couldn't take the cat because at the time she was homeless, and right now she wasn't looking to handle the responsibility of a pet when she was looking for a way to leave this world someday soon. She would be exploring this entire world, but she wanted to remain close to where the portal had opened. She was looking at all possibilities, however slim. And this was one of them. So her home base had to be here in Tokyo, and nothing could be allowed to compromise that. I did, but I changed my mind. Okay, I'm not letting you take him home until you tell me why you changed your mind. Hitoshi looked back to her. When he was injured, I saw it happen. I saw the car coming on the road, but I couldn't do anything. When it drove away, I went to the vet, and when they said there was nothing they could do, you waited with him. Sakura nodded. What? You were feeling guilty because you didn't jump in front of a speeding 3,000 pounds of metal. The lacking response answered. Wanting to be a hero, but having a quirk that was judged as villainous, adding to the misconception was being unable to save a stray cat, would start weaving threads of doubt. Just screw it. What does that mean? Hitoshi frowned. Either move on from the mistakes you made or find a way to fix it, but dwelling isn't going to help anyone. Sakura craned her shoulder back, feeling the bone pop. I can promise you this much, nothing good comes from dragging your past with you. Hitoshi glanced down at the cat again. You're weird, Sakura. She brushed against his shoulder. Is that a bad thing? She was closing in on 3 figures, 2 closing in towards the center, each in familiar features, dark hair, blonde, and white. Hands extending outwards. Faces completely blacked out as if they were never meant to be seen. Her mouth opened to call out, but all that escaped was the thick substance of red pooling out. Again she tried to get her voice, to move her body, but it was as if a weight was pressing down on her chest, inhibiting all other forms of motion. It seemed her body forgot how to breathe, her chest stopped moving, she couldn't inhale. Her ears wouldn't register sound, her body couldn't grant the tiniest motion of a finger, all which heightened her fear of sight that remained present. Falling like a solid statue, watching vivid environments flash around her, flames scrunching out a face with angry yellow eyes ready to engulf her. then a pool of moldy gray liquid simmering with steam closing in. Then fragments of snow and ice curling around like a whirlwind. She tried to cry out, she tried to scream as she fell as if with no range of motion. Down below, she neared a pit of darkness, growing closer faster than she wanted. Like her stomach was being lifted towards her chest, she fell faster. Images filled her vision in place, a baby with pink, her younger self crying in a park, a red ribbon, her friends, school, graduation, parents. Flashes of her being in each of these moments as they passed too quick to capture at a regular pace, but as if she was reliving it all as solid as reality. Then when she stops falling, nothing. Ah! Sakura involuntarily sprung forward, heaving for air she had been denied in her nightmare. Then would paw at the scar on her chest as if trying to soothe friction with a source she couldn't find and erase the hidden memories that joined in from her life flashing before her eyes. Recurring dreams, exaggerating the war and her end in it tended to surface when she least expected, and in conjunction would be the uncomfortable tightening in her chest from sleep paralysis. It was becoming routine and she didn't like it. Kicking back the covers on the single bed, Sakura walked into the bathroom, pulling down the tank top to observe the scar under the flickering light. No matter how many times she examined it, she just couldn't make sense of how it came to be, or rather how that was all left. I should be dead, that was the only thought that came to her when she saw it every time. How she healed from such an injury to be left only with this scar was a miracle she couldn't realize. In a manner, she was grateful to be able to see this scar, so she knew what happened back in her world was real and that while she was here, her friends were back home. Safe at last. Done with war. She just wouldn't be able to see it, nor properly mourn the loss of her friends and comrades at their funerals. There was likely one being held for her. After splashing water on her face, Sakura moved into the kitchen to make coffee. When she had dreams like these, the temptation to go back to bed was usually lost. Thankfully it was not a constant issue. This just means I get an early start, she pulled the corner of her lips up. Opening her kitchen cabinet and then fridge, she sighed, I need to go shopping. Sakura's daily routine usually started with morning training. As a bookworm, she adorned cramming in a corner of the library and reading. However, as a shinobi who had experienced firsthand what a burden neglect of training and skill honing could result in, Sakura was motivated to keep at the practice. Even more so given past events. Getting back to her world was still a distant figure she needed to calculate. Hence her time would be better consumed training instead of dwelling. In that case, she could multitask on her warm-up. Her run was out of the neighborhood she stayed, to the coast where she would keep going until she reached the same abandoned building she stayed in before. She could train, be as loud as she wanted, and no one would be any the wiser. There were targets set around make of broken pieces of wood with drawings. She used her newly purchased shuriken and kunai knives. She made her own training dummy. Strung up drums with metal chains to use as punching bags which didn't last for more than one round, and the rest of her training she resumed without equipment. The barrel hanging from the branch was taking slashes from Sakura's chakra scalpel. The metal broke through with either fine lines or punctures from her entire hand breaking through. When the barrel couldn't take any more of the abuse, an uneven part fell off with a thud. Still can't sharpen it quick enough to go all the way through. A sidekick threw the remaining barrel from the chain and into the collapsing wall. For most of the day after returning to her apartment to clean up from her workout, Sakura would go to the library to do more research on this world and methods of escaping it. In response to her research, she learned that quirks were hereditary but could evolve, mutate, and develop in certain cases. History of quirks were not the kindest to its receivers. It's amazing how far they've come. Sakura was sitting in the back of the library, a tower of books at her side and a notepad in front of her. Quirk frequency refers to quirks that replicate similar traits among individuals with no relation to one another, such as gigantification. There are also quirks of certain natures that are not largely common even in today's age. This includes regeneration and/or healing, which allows repairing severe damage to the body, and warping quirks that allow individuals to teleport themselves and/or others to different locations. She grabbed another file, Documents regarding individuals' quirks fall under personal information and cannot be accessed without permission from appropriate authorities. Damn, learned how to use that computer for nothing. Despite going as far as to investigate cases of different forms of rips in space-time and dimensional travel and so on. She would only receive links to works of fiction or theories in papers immediately when she added Otherworld. Hours passed before Sakura left the library again, gaining new knowledge about the world she was now in and disappointments that it was all she gained. I don't want to try cooking today. Still can't get the taste of that mince pie out of my mind, Sakura grimaced before turning to the next aisles, finding the easy frozen meals and tossing that into her cart. Cooking wasn't one of her strong skills, and she didn't have a flair for housework either, but living on her own for this long, already Sakura was becoming accustomed to the new roles she had to play. She strolled through the supermarket, familiar with its layout by now. She often made just one trip for a big purchase for the week so she didn't have to come around often. It was in a fairly quiet part of town that grew near silent in the last afternoon, just as the sun was about to take its final peak. Everything on her list in the cart, Sakura lined at the cashier's counter to check out. The current customer had moved out of the way so it was just one more in front of her. Her eyes hardened, she looked past the lady in front of her to the entrance/exit of the supermarket. Some of the other customers in front had noticed it as well. A large figure looming over the entrance, too big to fit through. The top of the walls broke through, cracks running up to the ceiling, shattering some of the lights, as glass scattered, screams and alarms joined in. A voice deep, projected intentionally to capture the entire store's attention. Now that's what I call inconsiderate. Can't even get through the front entrance. Sakura let out a sigh. Oh damn. The crime rate in Japan had been listed as one of the lowest in the world. Despite this, Sakura saw many petty crimes being committed throughout her days here. Made her think about how bad the situation might be in other countries of this world. Society had taken some of these crimes and looked at them as entertainment, a live show of sorts when heroes were around. Heroes technically were sources of entertainment, that's why they appeared in adverts and commercials and were hot topics in news stories, always on the front page. Glamorized to appeal to society and remedy the fear of quirks and what they could do. It was a brilliant method of creating an environment to control the chaos. The issue was, for people who were born with such a prominent individuality that could only be expressed through following certain doctrine would result in some turning away from it. Deviant activity touched on psychological, environmental, and sociological factors, which varied person to person depending on individuals' beliefs and agenda, but villains likely followed similar patterns that resulted in them. That's what Sakura's analytical side concluded, as she viewed some of the most ridiculous acts of lawbreaking by villains. They had power but nothing to show for it. She understood the critical thought process but didn't exonerate villains for their actions that inconvenienced or endangered others needlessly. And she didn't appreciate becoming one of those individuals. Shelves crashed with magazines and specials displays placed out in the front of the store, all knocked down as the hulking individual stepped through as if deliberately burying his feet in the fall to crack the floors and cause tremors to exert fear and gain attention. It worked well. The whole store was up in a panic, customers and employees rushed back. It's a villain. Someone help. Call a hero. He was tall, towering, pink-skinned that folded over his head from his shoulders, casting a shadow over his face, emphasizing his cold white eyes. A chain cast over the right shoulder connecting to a corset vest. Sakura's mind distastefully thought one thing. Pink acorn, she drew in her bottom lip to bite. Few of the cashiers were frozen in fear as he neared them too quickly for their flight instincts to initiate. It didn't matter, since the exit was being barricaded. Some looking around hoping for a hero to appear. I want all of the store's cash-in bags within 2 minutes. Clean out those registers. The first aisle of items being tossed down accompanied by the second caused further distress and woke the cashiers from their fright as they started clearing out the money and putting it in their store's bags. Hurry up. There were whimpering mutters in the back, people all uttering the word hero and save repeatedly, likely wishing for one to appear about now. Sakura was one of them. Another aisle was smacked down by the villain. I'm going to lose my shopping spot if this store gets destroyed. Customers were all huddled, and the cashiers were moving as quickly as their trembling, sweaty bodies would enable in this stressful situation. Sakura began unpacking her groceries from her cart. Okay, would you mind checking these out for me? The cashier didn't know where to look, but Sakura's stun had fractured his attention from transferring the money from the register to a store bag. Her demeanor easily stood out in the pool of fear everyone had created. And that's what she wanted. A shadow enveloped her entire form, and the cashier had shrunk down at the register table. Sakura just hoped the look was of fear and not because he urinated or she was going to have to check out at another register when this was finished. You little brat, didn't I say everyone on the ground? Sakura didn't even glance his way as she kept unpacking. Actually, you said, clean out the registers. Infuriating her opponents, making them drop their guard, drawing them in close, it was a typical tactic for Sakura. She especially used it against powerful opponents, but in this case, she was more concerned about other people being used as shields and hostages. She giggled, holding her chin, eyes narrowed with mischief, a crooked, mocking grin on her face. Judging by your memory skills, I can understand why you're in this line of activity. Why, you little. This villain wasn't just strong, he was also quick, Sakura deduced from how his fist drew back, blurring, but it was that moment Sakura moved as well, but not to attack yet. With the chain of his vest clasped firmly in one hand, Sakura dragged the villain out of the store through the wrecked entrance. On rollies, he skidded across to the middle of the street. Onlookers were few and more spaces were available. Even so, Sakura knew better than to prolong a fight with someone unhinged, angered, and strong. Even more so on account of her actions. The villain laughed, maniacally. I get it now. Wanna play hero, little girl? Fine then. He started shifting from one side to another, to show off his speed, then appeared right in front of her to take another swing of his fist. Let's play and see who. Yeah, not really. Sakura's movements were swift and fluid. She curled her fingers on the gold wristband, stuck her foot to anchor against his and watched the villain flip onto his back. Her fist impacted the villain's gut through his vest. She pushed further, causing him to cough up a bit of blood. The ground had a slight tremor as this happened, and the tar had small fractures beneath the surface, as Sakura made sure to keep her chakra release in check to avoid uplifting the road. Though she waited for a reaction, the villain wasn't awake anymore. Sakura craned her neck to the right, cranking her shoulder. I'm not playing anything, idiot. Then she came back inside, asked to check out her items and left when the police cars were down the road. The store cashier watched the penstroke follow his every word as he gave his report. Feeling somewhat prideful as the witness to the attempted larceny and defeat of Vihara headgear. He was a powerful villain that had earned a reputation for larceny and murder, and now he was finally apprehended. By a teenage girl. And you don't know her name? No, sorry detective. Another spectator abruptly entered the conversation. She was amazing, beating that villain with one punch. And she's just a kid too. I mean, the video is just. Can I see that video? The quality of the video was subpar, but understandable given it was taken by a shaking witness. It started with Detective Zukachi looked at the screen in disbelief. He could see the face clearly in one frame, for barely 4 seconds. It was all done instantly, almost impossibly quick. The villain was dragged out of the store and then taken down outside. But what had him in awe other than the actions taken was the one responsible for those actions. Without a doubt, he could place the face to a name. This is not possible, but he was certain of it. This was the same girl that had disappeared right under their noses at the hospital, well and fine and taking down villains like a vigilante. I better call Eraserhead. Are you sure it was her? I'll send you the video to confirm, but I'm positive that this is our missing girl. Alright, send it to my email. Get back to me if you find anything else and I'll keep an ear out. Shouta swiped his screen to end the call. He turned on the computer on his desk, logged in, and opened his emails. It was assumed that the girl ran away because she wanted to avoid being taken by social services. It was a wonder how she managed to escape the hospital's 4th floor without leaving her room down a straight drop. The girl was an enigma, which made it even harder to put out a report of her. That night he found her looked like she was on the verge of death. Her clothes were ripped in the section, revealing a scar with blood fresh enough to mingle with the air and stain the ground beneath her. Signs of a very fresh and recent wound. The fact that the doctor was able to confirm she could heal, had led him to conclude she managed to repair whatever damage was done to her. On the other hand, what brought her to that position still lingered on his mind. "Hey there, you're supposed to be finalizing the test papers for the entrance exam. What's with the long face?" Shouta didn't turn his head, but his eyes did glance for a few seconds towards the source of the very loud and overly positive tone voice. His colleague, Hisashi Yamada, hero name present Mike. Shouta's classmate in high school and currently work colleague at UA. Though they were in the teacher's office, like many others here he was in his hero costume, consisting primarily of black leather, from neck to toe. The computer made a ding when a new message arrived. Shouta opened the attachment video and pressed play, enlarging to screen to ensure he didn't miss anything. What he saw surprised him. "Look at this," he said to Hisashi. "Whoa!" Hisashi exclaimed when the video got to the part of Sakura punching the villain. "Isn't that guy high on the watch list?" "I'm more focused on the kid taking him down," Shouta said with a slight hiss in his voice. "She's that girl I was telling you about. Went missing from the hospital a few weeks ago." "Oh. The one that's got you doing all those late night patrols and adding darker shades to the rings under your eyes?" Hisashi moved closer to the screen. He pressed replay and increased the volume. "You little brat, didn't I say everyone on the ground? Actually, you said to clean out the registers." Hisashi snickered. "That's some kid. Looks about the right age to be signing up for a hero course, huh? She's a runaway patient, possibly with amnesia. Not to mention a minor no one has reported missing, and with an identity that can't be found in any of the databases. What makes you think she'll be applying to school?" "Who will be applying to school?" a light voice chimed in. Shouta and Hisashi turned away from the screen, dipping their chins down. "Principal Nezu." That's it. Please comment for a part 2.